Hi everyone, I'm so honored to be here, and I would really love to dedicate this talk tonight to my late husband, in memory of my late husband, Kristine Carlson, who didn't sweat the small stuff. Now, me, on the other hand, I sweat this pretty good, and just so you know, when Sherry asked me to speak, I really didn't know what I was going to talk about, honestly. I have all these amazing stories to share with you, but I wasn't sure how they were going to all come together for one idea that would change the world. But that was kind of where I had it wrong. It was like one idea at a time changes the world. So I was feeling a lot of pressure with that, and I was sweating it. And one night, I woke up at 2 a.m. When I'm often, worried about something, or I'm a little bit stressed out, or I'm sweating something, I wake up and I finally surrendered after 3 nights of this, and I said, Spirit, please, tell me what I'm going to say at TED. Tell me, please. I just want to go back to sleep. And I heard very clearly, Chris, talk about what it means to live in spirit. Talk about what it means to wake up to an inspired life. So I want to paint you a picture of a man who has inspired me my entire life, and it's my father. And his name happens to be Ted. So my dad loves to woodwork. And last summer I was visiting my parents in Eugene, Oregon, and I was standing in the kitchen having coffee with my mom. And my dad walks in the kitchen, and he's got, his big shoes on and his white socks up to his calves, and he's got his Don't Sweat the Small Stuff cap on. And he walks in and he says, "Gonna go cut me down a dead stump of a tree." And my mom and I smile, because that's not unusual to hear from my dad. He loves his chainsaw. So we're driving down the city street in Eugene, my mom and I, we're running errands, and I just noticed somebody off to the side of the road in front of somebody's house, and it's a guy with a big chainsaw. And I look at him, I'm like, Mom, is that really Dad in front of those people's house? He's really cutting down the stump there? And my mom says, yeah, he's actually doing them a favor, she said, because they would have to pay to have somebody take out this stump. And so I say, oh my gosh, you have to pull off to the side of the road, I have to take a picture of this. And there's my dad dragging this dead stump to his car, and to us, this dead stump, this dead tree, is just that, right? It's a dead tree. But to my dad, he's going to take that dead stump and he's going to take it back to his little workshop that he's so proud of in his garage, and he's going to carve it, and he's going to sand it, and he's going to glue it together, and he's going to make beautiful things for his family, bowls and cutting boards and pens and knife handles, all sorts of really cool stuff that we get for Christmas. So what's really cool about this is my dad was showing me this stain of, this wood stain that he had, and it was a really old can. I mean, really old can on a really old label, and I asked my dad, I said, Dad, how old is that can? He said, oh, it has to be about 30, maybe 40 years old. And he kept this can of stain around. Why? Because he's been waiting his entire life to have the time to do what he loves, to pursue his passion. And isn't that just so cool that at 80 years old, you could still pursue your passion and you could leave a legacy of love? Because me and my family will cherish these things that he leaves us. Now, the thing about inspired people, which is really cool, is that they see things that other people don't see. And, when I first heard about this talk, I actually Googled inspired. And I want to define that for you right now so you can really understand what I'm getting at here. Webster's dictionary defines inspired as an extraordinary quality surpassing brilliance that comes from an outside creative impulse that's exhibited through our actions. The second definition that I came across of inspired is to be aroused or guided by divine influence. The third definition was from a spiritual text called the Course in Miracles. And the Course in Miracles says inspire is to be living in spirit inspired. So you see, my dad gets this creative impulse from this wood, and he turns it into something really beautiful that he can leave. Now, I've lived in very inspired times in my life, and I've had some uninspired moments too. And what I'm going to share with you is that sometimes our inspiration, sometimes we are broken open to our passion for life or our purpose in ways that we really can't count on. On December 13th, 2006, that day started out like an ordinary day. I woke up, I reached for the phone to call my husband Richard, who had left for a business trip the day before. He parked his car at the West in San Francisco. And he left for his business trip, and I reached for the phone at 6:05 to wish him well on his flight. I missed him by 5 minutes. I got my kids up. They were 14 and 17 at the time. Got them out the door to school, did my breakfast dishes. I went to run errands in the car, just in my car running errands, and I pull into a mall parking space, and my cell phone rings. I pick up my phone, and I see a 212 area code, which was New York. And I'm thinking, oh good, he's there, he's landed safely. But instead of Richard on the phone, there were two complete strangers. And they began firing questions at me. Are you Mrs. Carlson? And I said, well, yeah, who wants to know? Well, this is a doctor and nurse calling. We're calling from a hospital in Queens, New York. And I say, right? And they say, we have Mr. Carlson with us here at the hospital. And I say, that's impossible. He was on a flight. How could you have him at the hospital? They say, well, something happened on that flight. Are you parked? And I'm starting to really feel incredibly nervous. And I say, well, yes, I'm parked. Why? And they say, we are sorry to inform you, Mr. Carlson has expired. I say, what? What? Expired? In my mind, I'm thinking, how can you tell me the love of my life has just expired? What the hell kind of word is expired anyway? So I don't need to tell you, I know I don't need to tell you what the moments and the days and the weeks and the months and the years following that phone call did to me and my family, Richard's parents, my parents, his sisters, and everyone. People in the audience here tonight who knew Richard. It shattered us. It shattered us. He was the most vibrant man, and he expired. But I have a distinction to make for you tonight, a very clear distinction about my own experience. Several months in grief, I was journaling, because journaling was one of the most healing things I could do. And in my journal, I all of a sudden just wrote this line, and I said, my God, I've been heartbroken open to feeling my life. That I was in a time period just prior to that, a transition time. A lot of people call it midlife crisis. I don't call it that, because I've been through a crisis. I call it a transition. And I was in one of those such transitions. My kids were growing up. I had held space for Richard to do his work in the world. I was a mother and a wife. And I was beginning to question, what's my next purpose? What is in store for me? How am I going to contribute? How am I going to serve? I was facing the empty nest, really. But clearly, what was so clear to me and just, I couldn't even believe it, was I said, oh my God, I have woken up. And I'm ashamed to say that I didn't even know I was asleep. Here I had the idyllic life. I had everything. And I wasn't feeling my life the way I felt it in grief. So the other thing about this for me was I had to find Richard where he was. I had to meet him in the divine. I had to find him in spirit. I couldn't do it any other way. I couldn't survive this loss. I couldn't face the rest of my life without him, without finding him where he was. And I searched for him in light. I searched for him in water. I searched for him in the moon and the stars and the tides everywhere. I searched and searched. And every time I looked and every time I breathed, I felt him. And I began to live in spirit, inspired. Now, Richard, he lived this way. The man breathed inspiration. And when you spend years in inspiration the way he did, you leave a legacy behind. And he did. He affected millions of people with his work. And he just considered himself an ordinary guy, living his life and observing how people could become happier. Now, here's how it worked for him. If he wasn't inspired, he did all sorts of things that increased his inspiration level. For example, we would have our coffee together every day, and we would spend about an hour just conversing about life. And many of the chapters of his books came out of those conversations. You know, our inspirational practice often included meditation or yoga or just anything that would breed inspiration. Now, he also read from other inspiring authors. And one day in his office, he was reading from one of his favorite authors, Stephen Levine, who wrote a book called A Year to Live. And in this book, A Year to Live, Stephen poses a question, and it's really a call to action. And it's this: if you had to make one phone call and you had an hour to live, who would it be to? What would you say? And why are you waiting? So unlike most people, Richard actually answered and responded to that question. And a few months later, it was our 18th wedding anniversary, 3 years before Richard died. He walked me out a grove of cypress trees out to this beautiful bench sitting above the Pacific Ocean, and we had a glass of champagne. And he pulls out from behind him this package of white papers tied with a gold ribbon. And I say, "What's this?" And he says, and he explains to me, you know, he'd been in his office and he answered this question and he asked me to read it. So I begin to read this incredible love letter, this 37-page response to this question. And it was everything that Richard valued most in this world. It was how much he loved us and everything. So I read this response and I pull out from behind me a card. Not my best moment. So Richard lived. People ask me often, you think he knew he was going to die? And the answer is yes. Richard lived as if his mortality was in his front pocket, not in the back pocket of denial, but right here, where it would help him stay awake and conscious in life. Now, when you live open-hearted like I did in grief, and you're very present to life, meaning presence, meaning you're not in your past and you're not in your future, you're right here, right now, miracles happen in your life. And I had one such miracle happen. I was returning back to the Bay Area, again from Eugene, Oregon, visiting my parents on their 50th wedding anniversary. And we walked up to the ticket agent, me and the girls, and the ticket agent says to us, "You know, you're not seated together on this flight." And we say, "You know, it's okay. We don't need to be seated together." We board but you know, the ticket agent actually takes it upon himself at that point because he's missing his family. And he says, "You're not seated together, but I'd like you to be seated together." And this is a very important point of the story, that he renegotiates our seats so that we're seated together. We board the flight, and the girls are next to me, and the window seat's open, and a man walks up. And he sits down, and I get this really odd feeling, super odd. I really want to talk to this guy, but he pulls his laptop out, and he begins to work. So I quiet down. On the descent of the flight, I asked him, is this a work day for you? And he says, yes, I'm sorry, I would have loved to have talked to you. What about you? I notice you have your computer with you. And I say, oh, no, I'm a writer, though. It's not a work day. And he says, well, anything I would know of. Have you been published? And I said, well, yes. You would probably be most familiar with my late husband's work, Kristine Carlson. He wrote Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. And the man got visibly bewildered. He almost looked white. And I said, what? And he said, did he die on a flight to JFK a little over 3 years ago? And I said, yes, how did you know that? He said, I was seated directly behind him on that flight. I was the first to assist the crew to work on him. I said, how can that be? What are the odds of this? And he said, there are no odds. But when you are really present to life and you are open-hearted, you don't miss the nuances of spirit. You don't miss those miracles that happen. And what he didn't know was that was my deepest desire. My deepest desire for my healing was to know who was on that flight with Richard, because I wasn't there. Now, in October, before Richard died, he turned to me and he said, Chris, do you know what I love about the human spirit? And I said, what, honey? He said, I love that there are people in this world that can take their greatest tragedy and allow it to move them forward in life, so their life has greater meaning than they might have otherwise had. Sometimes in our suffering, that's what happens to us. It's certainly what happened to me, but it doesn't have to happen that way. We all have the same opportunity every single day that we're alive to wake up to an inspired life. The question is, do you want to wake up to your inspired life today? Thank you.